Tributes pouring in all morning after the death of President George H.W. Bush.
Casey Siegel live for us outside Bush 41's home in Houston. Casey, good morning.
Good morning to you. And the last time since we spoke to you, you can now see there is a giant American flag that it now adorns the gate back there with the Christmas decorations to pay homage and tribute to the former president who died at his home last night at just after 10 o'clock local time. Of course, reaction coming in from all over the political world. President Trump releasing this tweet this morning. It reads, President George H.W. Bush led a long, successful, and beautiful life. Whenever I was with him, I saw his absolute joy for life and true pride in his family. His accomplishments were great from beginning to end. He was a truly wonderful man and will be missed by all. President Obama had this to say: America lost a patriot and humble servant in George Herbert Walker Bush. While our hearts are heavy today, they're also filled with gratitude, not merely for the years he spent as our 41st president, but for more than the 70 years he devoted in service to this country. So, of course, as the days and the hours come and pass, we're going to be hearing so many tales about this man who left an impact on so many generations.
Absolutely. Casey Siegel, appreciate that report. We'll be getting back to you as well.
All right, we mentioned it earlier today. You may remember when that cartoonist memorialized Barbara Bush after she passed away in April with this amazingly powerful and poignant cartoon.
Now, to honor the passing of President George H.W. Bush, this morning he reveals his new touching tribute, showing a family reunited.
Joining us now is the editorial cartoonist for the Clarion Ledger, Marshall Ramsey. Marshall, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us by phone. A few months ago, it was a sad occasion, but yet it was quite uplifting and moving when you drew that first cartoon. Let's start there. What was the inspiration for that?
You know, I was busy being a dad that night when I found out she had passed away, so I didn't really jump and go draw a cartoon very quickly. And the next morning, I sat down at the drawing board and I started thinking about her life and all the amazing things that she had seen and done and so forth. But I thought about that one piece of her life that needed to be healed and was losing a child. And I thought of Robin. So the cartoon just came boom like that. So I drew it, and obviously the family saw it, and it took off. And it was amazing. But what was really special about that cartoon is I started hearing from families who had lost children. And so it kind of took on a special life of its own.
But before we jump to the next thing, you suggested that you maybe heard from the Bush family. What did they say to you? Did someone send you a note? Or?
Yeah, Jenna had seen it about an hour after I had posted it, and she reposted it. And so then Jeb Bush Jr. posted it, and I'd heard from Neil Bush. And so I started hearing from different members of the family. And I got to tell you this, the Bush family is one of the most gracious families you will ever talk to. They were really touched, and I gave them the original of that cartoon to go. I think it'll probably end up in the library.
Wow.
It's amazing that the common thread throughout our first few hours of coverage this morning has been the president's humanity. And when asked to draw a cartoon about our 41st president, you didn't go through the history, you didn't go through the policy. You focused on that humanity. And sir, this is one of the most beautiful things that I think we're ever going to see. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I don't think you can look at this second cartoon that you drew and not be choked up. Talk about it.
I tell you, the idea kind of came around last April because he got incredibly sick after she had passed away, and he got sepsis. And both my parents, who've since passed, they had sepsis, and I thought, this is going to be tough. But I forgot, it was George Bush. The guy was, Superman. He bounced back, and so I just kind of tucked the idea away. And then last night, I was asleep on the couch, because I'm old and boring, and my wife woke me up and she said, George Bush died. And I said, no. But then I knew I had the idea, so I went ahead and did it. And I did want to touch on the fact that, he loved Barbara and he loved Robin. I mean, the family just talked to me and told me, they said that was the thing that they were talking about too. And so,
Marshall, before we go any further, I just want to, some of our viewers may be listening on satellite radio or something like that.
Sure.
Describe the second. So the first cartoon, people can see it on the screen, but others may just be listening. The first cartoon, of course, was Barbara Bush, shouting out Robin when she got to see her daughter finally, who had passed at the age of 4.
Right.
Describe the second cartoon.
Sure, it's she saw Robin. And so I had them waiting for him, and of course he arrived in his TBM Avenger, which was the plane that he flew in World War II. And so he's arrived. He's got his jacket over the back, which that was actually inspired by a statue that's in the Houston airport, of all things, of George Bush. I just remembered seeing that image. So I had him being greeted by them, and they were all reunited as a family.
Marshall, one of the most wonderful things about this second image is the fact that you included the Avenger. And one of the multiple photos during George H.W. Bush's life that shows just unadulterated joy on his face was when an Avenger did a flyby the day that the aircraft carrier that was named after him was christened. And apparently it was a surprise to him. He didn't know. And it's really an amazing photograph. And so meaningful to him in that moment, and the fact that you captured it here is absolutely exquisite. And we thank you for the emotions that this evokes. Certainly, that's why I've been quiet this whole time. It's been difficult to control, and really, it's beautiful.
You're very, very welcome. A friend of mine actually has a plane just like it, and I got to fly in it just a few months ago, actually. And that was just an incredible thrill. And I can't even imagine being 18 years old
Right.
or 20 years old and having that much responsibility in your hands. I mean, that shaped that whole generation. It's just amazing.
Marshall Ramsey, thank you so much for getting up and being on the phone with us this morning to discuss an amazing yet simple piece of work that will resonate with so many millions of people when they see it this morning.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but Emily, we were, while we were showing the images, we were turning to you because the viewers couldn't see us, as if it was your turn to ask a question. You kept passing because you couldn't speak because it was that moving.
Really, I mean, I think, and I don't think you have had to know that former president to be moved by the lifetime of service and the fact that the commitment to family was so apparent in everything he did. And that's why, yes, those cartoons are so moving for me. If you have family, if you love anyone on this earth, then this just to me is, it just evokes so much emotion. It's so sweet, Marshall, so simple and so divine at the same time. And I think that really sums up the grace that was.
The way he just sort of dashed it off, and yet it was so powerful. He said, yeah, I just kind of did it real quick, and it's amazing.
And so much of what we do in our business is along party lines, and we discuss policy and we discuss fights. And here's an individual who led an amazing life of public service, who was the President of the United States, and really two things stood out in that picture. One, his time defending our nation, and two, the love of his family. Think about that. Think about that for a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Florida Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen is the former chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We've been talking about foreign affairs, and she joins us to reflect on President Bush's legacy on the world stage. Good to talk to you this morning, Congresswoman.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much.
Talk a little bit about this. Yeah, talk about this man on the world stage.
Well, he was such a kind and gracious man. What a joy it was for me to visit a member of the United States Congress serving with him at the White House. He came down to campaign for me in my first election in 1989, and it wasn't difficult to get Democrats to come in and fill that hall along with Republicans. Why? Because he was always a bipartisan man. He was a gracious gentleman. He treated everyone with respect, even if he had an opposing opinion. And it just takes you back to the time where civility was the norm in Washington. Now in Congress, we're so divided and so nasty. But he was a president who talked about a kinder, gentler nation. And oh boy, that would be great to hear.
It's funny that you mentioned that phrase. I'd forgotten that because we've been covering so much ground, and some people kind of mock that kinder, gentler thing, and they were wondering, was he slapping at Ronald Reagan? Did he think that Ronald Reagan was too divisive? So talk about that, because it was important.
No. And absolutely not, because he always said that the 8 years that he served as vice president to the Big Dipper, those were the most defining moments of his life. And he had many defining moments, but he always had those kind words about everyone. And he got along so well with Congress. I remember being on the House floor when he talked to us about the Iraq invasion on Kuwait and what we had to do. He brought us together. Dante Fastel, a great congressman, Democrat from Miami, was in charge of the Foreign Affairs Committee upon which I served and then eventually chaired. But he was a Democrat, but he was the one who channeled us all together to support the commitment of our armed forces overseas to fight against Saddam and kick him out of Kuwait. And again, that was not as difficult then as it would be today, because George Bush was that guiding light and that spirit of bipartisanship. And we had so many people when he came down to Miami. And I remember the first day when I got sworn into Congress, he invited my father, who was my my campaign manager. Jeb Bush, the President's 41st son, was my overall campaign manager. And I thought, oh my gosh, we have votes in the House. But it was already the first day I missed votes. But who could turn down an invitation from 41?
Absolutely.
Congresswoman, we thank you very much. We do have to get going. We appreciate your time this morning. More continuing coverage of the legacy of President George